hidden. In the story of Esther, we learn about hidden things. In Esther, the word God is never mentioned. In exile, is God hidden? Esther's name means to hide or to conceal or to keep secret. The Hebrew noun means hiding place or covering or protection. So if you read Esther's name, it means something like, I am hidden or concealed. Hidden. How do we deal with this story of Esther? Last week we learned about Queen Vashti. We learned about what it was like to be among the powerful and what could happen at the whims of powerful men. This week we learned about women who are not powerful, who don't have a say, who don't have the means to say no. We learn about the oppressed in the kingdom, not the powerful. It begins with the king regretting that he has gotten rid of the queen and wanting something different. And so his advisors come up with this plan to gather all the beautiful young women. Notice they must look a certain way. They must be beautiful. All the beautiful women of the kingdom to bring to the fortress. Now I want you to picture this. What does a fortress look like? For those of you who've been to Europe, you've seen where they place them. The fortress is always at the highest point, so it's the most defensible. So everybody whose daughter was stolen can look up to where those stolen daughters are. They are taken into the fortress, behind the walls, separated from who they were, who they are to become. And it says that one of those women is Esther. Esther, who is the adopted daughter of Mordecai. Mordecai, who is a list of people who were taken into exile. And here the Hebrew is unclear. It says, and Mordecai was with them in exile. Meaning that they didn't know if, like according to the list, Mordecai would have come with his ancestors in exile, but then he would be like 100 years old. So this unclear Hebrew allows us to think about trauma, about what it means to have experienced trauma in your life and in the life of your ancestors, and how that trauma can continue to impact generation upon generation upon generation. That even though Mordecai may have not been dragged into exile, but born in exile, the trauma of the loss of place is in his very being, in his bones. And Mordecai knows what it's like to live in this life where you can't be completely you, that you have to hide those parts of yourself that are different, that aren't desired by the common understanding of what culture should be. And he teaches Esther to blend, to fit in, to become what they need her to be. And he invites her to not share who she is. Don't tell anybody that you're Jewish. So instead of going by her given name, Hadassah, the name that her mom or dad gave to her, the name that means righteousness, she goes by the name Esther, hidden, covered, disappeared. And so the king and his advisors gather up all the young women, the beautiful young women, and bring them to the fortress where they undergo beauty treatments for an entire year. So they weren't beautiful enough as they were. They now have to go through everything that can improve their beauty. And then it says, here's how the king is going to choose which one of you will be queen. Each of you will spend one night with the king. I will leave it to your discretion to decide what that night was. The Bible does not say. But they spend the night with the king. What does that mean for each of those women? We don't know how many were gathered, but we know that they didn't have choices about what they would look like, that they did everything in a year to make them fit the mold of what would be beautiful. And then they were allowed to take whatever they wanted with them to see the king. I wonder what people grabbed. Because they wouldn't be going back to the place they were. They would now be going to the place where the king keeps all the women he wants, the concubines. And so what would you grab? What would you take with you? Would you take something that would remind yourself of what used to be, of the people that you had to leave behind, of the people that you were taken from? Would you grab something of worth, of value, a jewel, a gold chalice? What would you take? It says Esther, who's hidden, doesn't take anything except what the person in charge will allow her to have. And she spends the night with the king. And the king chooses her. Why does he choose her? Does he choose her because she is the exact opposite of Vashti? Because we don't know about Vashti, but we could speculate that they got married when you get married, and so now they're in their middle ages. Like if you looked at some of the pictures of Esther, sometimes the king is portrayed with a white beard and white hair. One of the images I have coming up has him young and strong. But Esther is probably really young. Probably 14 to 16. And most of the girls are probably 14 to 16. So not full grown, but tall enough to be a grown-up. The exact opposite of Vashti, who had been queen for a while, who knew her worth, was from the culture, knew how to make her way through the powerful men, and had the ability to say no. Esther had been taught to not make waves, to remain hidden, to not speak up, to make it so that people didn't notice that you weren't quite the same as the rest of them. Maybe he chose her, not just for her beauty, but because she was docile and quiet and seemed easy control, the exact opposite of who Vashti was. So when I planned this in May, the news was not what it was or is now. So just for the record, I did not choose this because of what's going on now. But this story speaks to this problem that young women have and continually have had. That older men, powerful men, rich men, often take what they want and create the means by which for that to happen. They believe that there are probably over 20 million victims of human trafficking globally, including at least 5.5 million children. And 55% of those trafficked are women and girls. Although numbers are unknown for sure because most people are just guessing about disappearances and raids and speculation. That trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. And it affects 161 countries. We know about it here partly because it's always in the news as a foil. The reason why we can arrest people coming across our border is because they've been trafficked, that people have stolen them from the place they were, and so we need to free them so that they can return. And it's a real thing. If you hear the stories of the immigrants that come to our border from the South, the journey through the South is horrific for women. And that's the place Esther is. She's in that place where she had no control. And she had the one night with the king where it doesn't say what happens, but we guess. And it isn't her choice. Deborah Ias wrote this bit of a poem. She'd forgotten how to smile. She looked into the mirror, urging her muscles to remember the pattern. Her fingers edged her cheeks upward, tracing the outline of what she sought. She clawed into the depths of her soul, into the darkness that plagued her. She searched for a marvel, a sparkle of joy and light. They had put her down, stripped her of her purity, charted her like an object, sold her to the highest bidder, her identity lost in more ways than one. She survived. Esther survived. We don't know what happened to those other women. We don't know what they did or didn't have to do, what happened after the king chose the one he wanted. We don't know. What we do know is that Esther is now queen. And here's the thing, the good news about the story comes in the following weeks. The good news is not always good news. What does it look like to live in exile? They think that this story was written as a way to explain why they celebrate Purim, their most joyous holiday, their Halloween, where they dress up and dance and eat and celebrate. And this story was created to explain why they get to that happy holiday that celebrates the rescuing of the people. But to get there, we have to go through Esther's pain. We have to go through what she couldn't talk about, what she wasn't allowed to speak about. We have to go through what it means to be the stranger in a strange land. In this story of Esther, we are meant to sit with that uncomfortableness. Sit with what does it mean to live in a place and be in a place where it isn't in your control. So because it's around the 4th of July, I like to watch Hamilton and sing Hamilton songs because it's just one of my favorite musicals. But one of the just hinted at stories, a throwaway line, is about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Heming. Sally would be our Esther. People often describe it as this great love affair where Thomas Jefferson has multiple children with Sally. But if you're a slave, it is not consensual, it is not choice, it is not a decision that Sally gets to make about what happens and how it happens. At the very heart of our country is this evilness that we don't talk about. At the heart of our country is this trafficking of bodies that didn't have decision-making ability because it was taken from that. At the heart of our founding story are presidents who treated other people as less than human. The story of Esther is meant to speak to those moments, to speak to those people in captivity, to ask questions of how to live in a place where you aren't granted the ability to thrive, to live to your fullest God-created identity. That sometimes you have to be hidden. So what's our role in this? I think one of our roles is that we as the church often don't tell these stories. How many of you have ever heard a sermon on Esther 2? You've probably heard the story of Esther 4 and Esther 9, because 7 and 9 appear in the Advent scriptures. But the rest of the story is never told. And you can't get to the hope and promise if you don't go through the pain. But the story of Esther is meant to remind us that sometimes exile is hard. And sometimes in that midst of that hardness, it feels like God isn't there, that God is hidden. Because all of these horrible things are happening all the time. And we have to, as the church, speak out in those times of hiddenness, in those times where it seems like God is absent, in those times when we are seeing people not in their complete belovedness. And we have to speak out and share what it is Jesus taught us, that everyone is worthy, that everyone is welcome at the table, that everyone deserves to have food and clothing and shelter. Every stranger needs to be welcomed with water. Every prisoner needs to be visited and fed. That Jesus taught us that in those exilic moments, in those moments of captivity and poverty, the church's role is to speak out and to act out. To speak up and say, this is not okay. To say that everyone deserves food. Everyone deserves shelter. Everyone deserves the basics of water and clothing. Everyone deserves to be comforted when they are in captivity. You can draw your own connections of what that means in the world today. For there is a lot of places where this story and pain of Esther is playing out. There is a lot of places where women aren't having much option or choice. And we can say enough, that it's not okay. We can remember the Esthers and the Sallys and all those victims of Jeffrey Epstein, the ones we don't talk about, the women and children who have been hurt by what we're hearing in the news. to remind them that they are beloved. And even as this painful story is told over and over and over again, they were created to be the word, the name of Esther, Hadassah, righteousness, that they are right with God because in their very being they were created in the image